U.S. Special Envoy Lander King says Houthi militia attack on Ma'rib blocks all peace efforts. Despite escalation, Houthi militia receives considerable losses in different fighting fronts. Rebel militia continues to attack civilian areas in Hodeidah, violating the Stockholm Agreement. Welcome to Yemen Today TV. This is the English news with me, Roshan Fouad. United States Special Envoy to Yemen, Tim Lander King, said that Houthis are determined to take Ma'rib. According to the Washington Post, Lander King stressed that this offensive is a real stumbling block to negotiations. The European Union's foreign policy official Joseph Borrell said the European Union condemns all Houthi practices. Borrell added the EU is conducting contacts with Houthis to resolve the crisis. In an interview with Al Hadath TV, the official indicated that EU focuses on the humanitarian side to alleviate hardship for Yemenis. In Aden, clashes raged between members of the Southern Transitional Council. According to security sources, at least 4 have been killed during those clashes. Locals said heavy gunfire could still be heard at midday in crater that houses government headquarters and the central bank. The Prime Minister of the government returned to Aden last week from Saudi Arabia and is residing at the presidential palace in Crater along with other government ministers. Meanwhile, the STC's Security Belt Forces unit said in a Twitter post, "We ask citizens in Crater to remain at home during the next few hours as security and anti-terrorism forces clean the city from outlaw elements." Despite recent escalation in different fronts, Houthi rebels have suffered considerable losses in lives and equipment. More on the military developments is within the following report.
Yemen is passing through a very critical moment. The country witnesses a decisive turning point on the military side with fierce clashes taking place in the most strategic fronts between the resistance and the government forces, from one hand against the Houthi rebels on the other hand. Although Houthis are scaling up their strikes, especially in Hodeidah and Ma'rib, they are suffering big losses day by day. In Ma'rib, the government forces backed by the tribes are engaging in fierce battles on the outskirts of the city to block Houthis' repeated attempts of infiltration. A military source said that the clashes are the strongest of its kind, especially in the front of Al Ghail in the directorate of Harib. In Al Ghail, the government forces launched a series of attacks against the Houthi positions. In the same front, the rebels failed many times to infiltrate into the government positions. In Al Jawf front, the government forces regained a number of positions and thwarted the Houthi fires from Al Labanat camp. Backed by tribes, the government forces started a wide-scale military operation in Al Hazm city. According to a military source, the forces were able to liberate a number of positions east of Hazm and controlled the firing from Al Labanat camp. Analysts say that the operation is reciprocal below the Houthis to increase escalation on Ma'rib front. In Hodeidah, all Houthi movements and military reinforcements dealt with properly by the joint forces. The rebels tried to reinforce their positions in the strategic city, but all their attempts were stopped by the joint forces. The militia suffered considerable losses in lives and equipment, and in response they keep shelling civilian houses and farms. According to analysis, these military developments could be a turning point in the fighting against the rebels in the coming days.
Houthi militia prevented students of Harib and Abdiyah districts in Ma'rib from getting to their universities after imposing a complete siege on them. Students of Sheba University staged a protest against Houthi practices. They called on the militia to allow the students to get to their universities easily. This report has more on that.
Houthi militia recent attack has affected the course of education in Ma'rib. They obstructed hundreds of students from education in Abdiyah and Harib districts. They prevented them from passing through and entering Ma'rib to continue their university education. This foresees an educational disaster that deprives students from their right to education and build their future.
Today, we stand in solidarity with our colleagues from Harib, whom Houthis stand in front of them as an obstacle to continuing their university education. We refuse to let the militia destroy the dreams and ambitions of our colleagues from Harib. We demand from the militias to take off their military checkpoints from the streets and allow university buses to transport students to and from the university.
This barbaric behavior prompted students of Sheba University to stand in solidarity with their colleagues. They called on local authorities, international and human rights organizations to put pressure on Houthis to leave the students away from conflicts and allow them to continue their education in Ma'rib. The statement of the solidarity confirmed that many departments of the university are now empty. No male or female students has attended the university after the Houthi militia launched their offensive on Harib.
The war against Houthis continues, but its effects prevented the students of Harib, Juba and Abdiya from continuing their educational journey and from studying. Today, the least we can do is stand with them.
The disaster when Houthis entered Harib and Abdiya was not limited to male and female students in the region. It has caused the absence of all basic services for citizens such as electricity, oil products and food. It caused displacement too. Houthis imposed a siege that foresees a humanitarian catastrophe that its effects may extend for months in the absence of urgent government interventions.
Houthi militia moved further reinforcements from several cities towards Ma'rib, France, and the western coast. Sources confirmed that Houthi militia sent more than 200 troops towards Ma'rib. Those troops were brought from Damar, Amran, Hajjah, and Sana'a. Turning to El Dala, joint forces backed by the southern resistance thwarted Houthi attacks. Field military source confirmed that the joint forces repelled 3 Houthi attacks in Sabira el-Jab in Ka'taba. To Hodeidah, the joint forces responded to Houthi fire sources which targeted residential areas in the city. A military source said that the joint forces inflicted direct casualties among the Ma'rib.
هم اليوم جثثهم يتلقوا مصارع.
Still in Hodeidah, where Houthi militia targeted the civilian area in El-Jah. Local sources said that the militia targeted the civilian areas with heavy mortar shells and caused fear and panic among civilians. Houthi militia continues violating Stockholm Agreement by constant targeting of civilian areas and destroying infrastructure of civil facilities. Last of such violations is the bombing of the Thabit Brothers commercial complex. This report has more on this story.
Houthi militia renewed targeting Thabit Brothers industrial and commercial complex with artillery shells south of Hodeidah in western Yemen. Field sources said that Houthi militia fired 282 caliber mortar shells. The militias aimed to destroy the complex completely. Employees in the complex were frightened. The deliberate Houthi shelling of the industrial facility caused burning of storage warehouses. One of the warehouses was completely destroyed. The Irani-backed Houthi militia continue hostilities by bombing the complex. They caused great material losses in the factory, in addition to the death and injury of dozens of factory employees. According to the Yemeni archive, Thabit Brothers factory complex in Hodeidah has been targeted more than 53 times since the start of war. The targeting resulted in great loss of life, in addition to material losses. The shelling doubled between 2018 and 2020 after the military confrontations stopped near the vicinity of the industrial complex. The attacks during the war period led to the burning of 7 warehouses completely, while 1 warehouse was damaged due to destruction in the front section. The approximate area of destruction is 2,600 square meters. Thabit Brothers factory complex is located south of Al-Hodeidah. It is close to fire lines. Thabit Brothers complex include more than 5,000 employees, most of whom work in the headquarters of the complex in Hodeidah. It consists of several commercial and industrial facilities for the production of dairy and various food products. The complex is one of the most prominent companies in Yemen. 102 people died and 60 others were injured, most of them employees from the attacks on the industrial complex since the start of the war in 2015. Great material losses sustained too, making it the most affected Yemeni institutions by the war. Similarly, Houthi militia bombed residential areas and farms in Tuhaita, which destroyed citizens' homes. These crimes are added to thousands of crimes committed by Houthis since the UN Stockholm Agreement. That seems like an excuse for the militia to continue their crimes rather than protecting civilians.
Coming next. Rebel militia continues its violations against women.
اقول لك راحت بالغداء لاهلها شلت الغداء وراحت بالاهلها في المزرعه والمزرعه ركبت على حمار ما حتى نص المزرعه وانفجر فيها اللغم دعست على اللغم وانفجر فيهم الحمار انتهى ما ترفت بقعت رجليها كامل نغير منها نغير الشبعله اللي هي البنت سابها من دور رجليها صافناها طبيه اقرب طبيه وصافناها لا هي بطلت رجليها كامل
التزود هلي وقابل لي لعب وطبعت تحت الزوايا
Welcome back. Houthi militia has launched a brutal campaign in which tens of women have been abducted and kidnapped. Among those were human rights activists and leading female figures working in public services. The following report has more on this story.
Abduction of girls, female students and women in Sana'a and the areas under the control of the Houthi militia has escalated in an unprecedented manner. Since the Houthi militia took control in 2014, civilians, women and children in particular, continue to be the first target and the most victims in this war. Rights Radar revealed that more than 35 girls and students were kidnapped from places of study and from the streets in the capital Sana'a during the last period. Before that, the Yemeni Organization for Combating Human Trafficking revealed the kidnapping and disappearance of 120 women in Sana'a, in which senior Houthi leaders were involved, which pressured the security and the judicial agencies in their areas of control to dilute the case and bury it. Noura Al-Jarawi, president of Women for Peace Coalition in Yemen, explained that grave violations of human rights and international law were committed against women prisoners in Houthi prisons, amounting to murder, physical assault, kidnapping and sexual violence. In addition, they were exposed to various forms of torture and abuse. The fabrication of criminal charges and the issuance of illegal sentences that amount to the death penalty has become a Houthi trademark. More than 1,000 women, including minors, are still detained in the prisons of the Houthi militia. Yemeni activists launched an electronic awareness campaign targeting children and girls to spare them from falling into the trap of kidnappers after an unprecedented wave of kidnappings that took place in the streets of the Yemeni capital Sana'a during the past few days. The campaign comes hours after the 13-year-old girl, Sumaya Al-Aslami, disappeared at 6:30 p.m. next to her home in the Ha'il neighborhood in central Sana'a. Many cases of arrests confirm that the Houthi militia kidnapped and arrested women and established secret prisons and detention centers. These centers are based in residential villas under the supervision of supervisors and Houthi leaders with the justification of honor or prostitution cases, taking advantage of these cases and adapting the judiciary to serve their purposes. The purpose is to blackmail the families of the kidnapped women and loot their money to support the war effort. The militia has been working on establishing women's militias whose members were trained in Iran by the so-called Fatimidates in the Iranian Revolutionary Guards and the mission of Zainabiyet, according to the Houthi militia, who tracks the activities of women and girls in universities, public places, activists, and field visits to residential neighborhoods to urge mothers to send their children to the battlefronts. This crime will never end unless the war is stopped. Community comes together and understands the scale of the disaster, and Yemenis should watch out for their children and never let them out in this forest, else they will be eaten by the wolves and street dogs.
In Taiz, rallies continue to reject economic collapse and poor living conditions. Local sources reported that hundreds denounced the government indifference and described it as a total failure and unable to address the alarming situation. A strike was started and shops closed their doors until the government intervenes to tackle such collapse. The United Nations Humanitarian Coordinator for Yemen, David Grassley, described the humanitarian situation in Yemen as being fragile. Grassley said that Yemen needs a constant support, especially during the coming weeks until 2022. According to Grassley, health, water, and sanitation suffer from a lack of funding by 80 to 85%. Houthi rebels have brainwashed generations of children, recruited them, and have sent them to war fronts. More details on the rebels' violations against children are within this report.
Yemen's future is withered by the sinful Houthi hands. With these words, Yemeni mothers in the Association of Mothers of Abductees expressed the tragedy of their sons, whom the Houthis drove mercilessly to its fronts, sometimes through recruitment, and sometimes from mine-planting fields, or to use them as human shields. More than 6 million children have been directly affected by the war launched by the Houthi militia since its coup against the legitimate government. It did not only stop here, but the Houthi militias have diverted more than 5.2 million children from school to the labor market and caused more than 2 million children suffering from severe malnutrition. The continuation of the Houthi coup militias in recruiting children, engaging them in absurd battles and exposing them to the risk of being infected with mines and diverting them from schools confirms the extent of their ugliness and their disregard for international conventions and humanitarian principles. The Houthis' practice of teaching children sectarian curricula and recruiting them to fight for them is a real disaster that must be stopped quickly. The Houthi militia has recruited more than 35,000 children since 2014, 17% of them under the age of 11, while 6,729 children are actively fighting. Houthis' cruel actions does not stop here, as they recently expanded their recruitment of children in Yemen, especially after their heavy losses in the battles of Hodeidah and the western coast. Violations of the Houthis against children are not limited to the areas under their control. They use schools for military activities. They target schools in government-controlled areas, attack IDP camps, and kill children in their discriminate attacks against civilian facilities, most notably last June's attack on a gas station in Ma'rib, which killed a number of children. Houthis are brainwashing children on a daily basis and sending them to war fronts. The world has to stand up for these children, or else there will not be a good, fair future for them, just like the children of the world.
The National Committee Against Coronavirus announced 28 new cases of the COVID-19 in 5 governorates. Committee officials said on Twitter that 13 cases were recorded in Aden, 9 in Ma'rib, 3 in Shabwa, 2 in Hadramaut, and 1 in Abyan. Also, 5 deaths were recorded, plus 8 recovered cases. With the current updates, the total confirmed cases are 9,139, including 1,734 deaths and 5,659 cases of recovery. Here is a reminder of the main headlines. U.S. Special Envoy Lander King says Houthi militia attack on Ma'rib blocks all peace efforts. Despite escalation, Houthi militia receives considerable losses in different fighting fronts. Rebel militia continues to attack civilian areas in Hodeidah, violating the Stockholm Agreement. This is the end of the news. It was Roshan Fouad. Thank you for watching.